You've spoken honestly about the possibility of war between US and China in the long term.
In the case of China, where the economy is likely to be 2, perhaps 3 times larger than that of the US. I mean, the architecture in China that's in recent years is far more impressive than the US.
Starlink isn't just about internet access anymore. It's become a battlefield in the growing tension between China and SpaceX. With nearly 6,000 satellites orbiting Earth, Elon Musk's Starlink has revolutionized communication, but not everyone sees it as just a tech breakthrough. For China, it's a direct threat, and now that threat may have been met with a bold and dangerous response. Reports are emerging of a cyberattack targeting Starlink, an attack so calculated that it raises chilling questions about the future of space warfare. How did China do it? And what does this mean for the security of space itself? Stay with us, because this revelation could change everything. China's strategy to disable Starlink. On January 15, 2025, the South China Morning Post published a report that sent shockwaves through the East and beyond. The report detailed an operation spearheaded by Wu Yunhua, one of China's foremost experts in astronautics. According to the study, Wu had successfully simulated a large-scale disruption of Starlink, using fewer than 100 Chinese satellites to disable nearly 2,000 of Elon Musk's satellites for over 12 hours. This groundbreaking strategy gained so much recognition that it was featured in a prestigious Chinese academic journal. The sheer scale and efficiency of the plan captured international attention, raising concerns about the growing space warfare capabilities of global superpowers. The operation proposed an innovative and highly sophisticated method of attack. Wu's strategy relied on advanced AI-powered Chinese satellites designed to systematically disable large sections of Starlink's network in a matter of minutes. The Chinese government has remained silent on whether this was merely a theoretical simulation or a test for future real-world applications. However, the fact that such research made its way into an academic journal suggests that China is openly exploring military applications for satellite technology. The idea that a relatively small number of Chinese satellites could cripple thousands of Starlink satellites so effectively has alarmed many within the space industry. Elon Musk's concerns and the growing tensions. Elon Musk wasted no time addressing the report, publicly voicing his concerns about China's capabilities and intentions. According to him, the technologies mentioned in the study were far more dangerous than they appeared on the surface. While the report framed them as tools for satellite management and control, Musk argued that they were, in reality, weapons in disguise. He pointed out that these systems relied on high-powered lasers and microwave technology to disable or manipulate Starlink satellites remotely. What disturbed Musk even more was the AI system behind the attack. Wu Yunhua's operation reportedly used an advanced binary AI algorithm modeled after whale hunting strategies. Just as whales corral fish into small, concentrated areas for easy capture, this AI would guide Chinese satellites into positions that maximize the impact of each attack. Instead of targeting individual satellites one by one, this approach could neutralize entire clusters simultaneously. The implications were staggering. If Wu's strategy worked as intended, a fleet of just 99 satellites could eliminate 1,500 Starlink units in under 2 minutes. Extending this to 4 consecutive attacks, China could potentially dismantle Musk's entire network of nearly 6,000 satellites in less than a day. The rapid escalation of satellite technology and military applications has heightened fears of a potential confrontation between global superpowers. With Starlink playing a key role in both commercial and military communication systems, the idea of a foreign nation gaining the capability to disable it raises serious security concerns. Musk has repeatedly emphasized that he does not want conflict with China, yet as space increasingly becomes a battleground for technological supremacy, many believe that a clash is inevitable. The comparison to Athens and Sparta, 2 ancient powers destined for confrontation, has become a common reference in discussions about US-China relations in space. Whether this remains a hypothetical scenario or a real geopolitical crisis remains to be seen, but one thing is clear. The era of space warfare is no longer a distant science fiction fantasy. It is unfolding right before our eyes. The growing threat against Starlink, The escalating efforts by Wu Yunhua and other top Chinese astronautic engineers suggest they are determined to push the limits of space warfare. Over the past year, China, often in collaboration with Russia, has increasingly targeted Starlink. They have employed various forms of interference, from jamming signals to launching cyberattacks on an almost weekly basis. These disruptive tactics, while concerning, were only the beginning. Now, China is advancing its strategy with more sophisticated weaponry, including high-power microwave devices such as the relativistic klystron amplifier and solid-state lasers. According to the South China Morning Post report, if this plan had been fully executed, a significant portion of Elon Musk's Starlink satellites would already be disabled. However, the very technologies China intends to use come with critical limitations. The RKA amplifiers, while powerful, require an enormous amount of energy to target multiple satellites at once. This leads to overheating, forcing the systems to cool down for several hours before they can be used again. This crucial downtime provides an opportunity for Musk and his engineers to respond and counteract the attacks. Despite their aggressive approach, China faces the reality that prolonged engagements in electronic warfare might not be as effective as they hope. Why is China targeting Starlink? The question remains, why would China go to such lengths to target Starlink? For most people in the West, Elon Musk is simply a tech entrepreneur focused on expanding internet access globally. However, for Chinese authorities and experts, his satellite network represents a much larger and more complex problem, one that touches on issues of military security, technological superiority, information control, and space management. At face value, Starlink's constellation of over 6,000 satellites was designed to provide civilians with reliable internet access, particularly in remote or underserved regions. However, a deeper examination of the network reveals capabilities that extend far beyond commercial use. This became glaringly apparent during the height of the war in Ukraine. The internet services provided by Starlink granted Ukrainian forces a significant tactical advantage over Russian troops. This not only enabled them to maintain communication despite Russian cyber warfare tactics, but also facilitated intelligence sharing, drone coordination, and real-time battlefield assessments. This single event fundamentally changed how China viewed Starlink. What appeared to be a business-driven venture now seemed like a tool that could be weaponized against foreign powers. Chinese authorities quickly recognized that if Starlink could support military operations in Ukraine, there was nothing stopping the US from utilizing it in a conflict involving China. From their perspective, Musk's involvement in Ukraine was not just a business transaction. It was a demonstration of Starlink's potential as an indirect asset of the US military. The fear of Starlink as a military tool. Chinese military strategists fear that in a future conflict, whether over Taiwan, the South China Sea, or another geopolitical flashpoint, Starlink could be used to bypass China's extensive cyber and communication control systems. With its vast network of satellites, Starlink could provide uninterrupted, high-speed communication to military forces, intelligence agencies, and allied governments, undermining China's ability to control information flow and digital infrastructure. This is especially alarming to a country that has built its power, in part, through strict regulation and censorship of internet access. For China, dominance in space is not just about exploration or commercial competition, it is about national security. The growing number of privately owned satellite networks, particularly those tied to US interests, presents a challenge to China's ability to control the digital landscape. If Starlink remains unchecked, it could tilt the balance of technological power away from China, making it vulnerable in both cyber and military conflicts. A brewing space. Cold War. With this in mind, it's clear that China's efforts to disrupt or disable Starlink are not merely acts of aggression. They are preemptive moves in what many analysts consider a brewing space Cold War. The rapid advancement of satellite technology and AI-powered space operations has transformed outer space into a new battlefield. Unlike traditional warfare, which involves ground troops, naval fleets, and air superiority, this conflict is fought through electronic attacks, signal disruptions, and satellite maneuvers. Elon Musk has repeatedly emphasized that he does not want conflict with China, yet his innovations place him at the center of a growing struggle between global superpowers. If Starlink continues to evolve, it is inevitable that more nations, not just China, will view it as both an asset and a threat. The question now is whether Starlink will remain a civilian-focused venture or if it will increasingly be seen as a tool of military strategy. Regardless of the outcome, one thing is certain: space is no longer just about exploration. It is now a battleground where technology, power, and national security intersect, and the world is witnessing the first moves in a conflict that could define the next era of global warfare. The growing threat of Starlink in cybersecurity. As China analyzed the impact of Starlink on modern warfare, its military experts identified several alarming possibilities. The satellite network could enhance intelligence sharing, accelerate reconnaissance missions, and provide secure communication channels for adversaries. To them, the fact that the US military hadn't imposed restrictions on its use suggested a broader strategy, one that didn't align with China's interests. Given the ongoing space race between the two global superpowers, China viewed this situation as another front in their technological Cold War. With private US companies like SpaceX gaining influence over critical space activities, it almost felt as if they had already lost the battle for dominance in orbit. This realization was especially difficult for a nation that prides itself on being a leader in cutting-edge technology. China's government had invested heavily in space research, satellite technology, and cybersecurity, yet Starlink's rapid expansion posed a challenge unlike anything they had faced before. What made matters worse was Starlink's history with cybersecurity vulnerabilities, which suggested that it might not even take a rival government to exploit its weaknesses. The shocking breach of Starlink's security. For years, security analysts and hackers alike had pointed out flaws in Starlink's system. While many vulnerabilities remained theoretical, an incident on August 10, 2022, sent shockwaves through the cybersecurity community. A programmer named Leonard Wouters, who worked at KU Leuven, demonstrated just how fragile Starlink's security could be. Unlike the elite hackers often associated with large-scale cyberattacks, Leonard was an ordinary software engineer at the time. Yet, he managed to uncover one of the first major security breakdowns in Starlink's user terminal system. Starlink's user terminals, typically installed on rooftops, allow customers to connect with the nearest Starlink satellites. These small, accessible devices were critical to the network's operation, but Leonard's experiment exposed a serious flaw. Knowing the significance of his findings, he waited for the annual Black Hat Security Conference, a renowned gathering for hackers and cybersecurity experts, to make his revelation public. During his presentation, Leonard explained the process in detail. Using an off-the-shelf mod chip that cost only $25, he physically altered a Starlink dish. The results stunned the audience. Within seconds, his mod chip bypassed all of Starlink's security protocols, granting him unrestricted access to the network. His exploit allowed free internet access with no payment restrictions, and he could use it anywhere, at any time, indefinitely. The implications of his discovery were enormous. If a single programmer with minimal resources could infiltrate a Starlink terminal, what could a well-funded, state-sponsored cyber attack achieve? China and other adversaries took note of the vulnerability, realizing that Starlink's widespread use made it a potential weak link in US cyber operations. Starlink's cybersecurity risks and global concerns. Leonard's demonstration raised critical questions about Starlink's ability to safeguard its network. If hackers could exploit such a simple vulnerability, what other security gaps remained undiscovered? Governments worldwide began reassessing their stance on Starlink, not just as an internet provider, but as a key player in modern military and intelligence operations. For China, this was another reason to act. They saw Starlink's network as both a technological threat and a cybersecurity liability. If it remained unchecked, hostile forces could use it to bypass China's cyber defenses, undermine national security, and even support military operations against them. With these concerns mounting, China's strategy became clear. Their efforts to jam signals, launch cyber attacks, and now simulate large-scale satellite takedowns weren't just about military superiority. They were about securing their own cyber future. Whether their plan would succeed remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. The battle for control over space wasn't just about exploration anymore. It was about who controlled the digital world, both on Earth and beyond. Starlink's growing vulnerabilities and China's strategic concerns. To prove the vulnerability of Starlink's security, Leonard uploaded the code he used to GitHub, making it open source for anyone to access. He believed his work was in its early stages, but could eventually evolve into an attack on the satellites themselves. Leonard speculated that, with some modifications, hackers could develop a system that would allow direct communication with the satellites, potentially giving unauthorized users unprecedented control. What made this revelation even more alarming was that Leonard had warned SpaceX about the issue as early as 2021. Instead of resolving the fundamental problem, the company merely made it more difficult to exploit. But according to Leonard, the fix was temporary and ineffective. All he had to do was tweak the mod chip, and the vulnerability remained just as exploitable as before. He advised SpaceX engineers that the only real solution would be to create a completely new version of the primary chip. Since every terminal out there had the same hardware flaw, the issue couldn't be resolved with a simple software update. SpaceX acknowledged the concern, stating that they were working on a solution. However, to this day, no one knows if the issue was ever fully addressed. Beyond cybersecurity concerns, China's apprehension towards Starlink runs deeper. The country has long pursued self-reliance in technology and digital infrastructure. A private US company offering unrestricted internet access directly threatens China's ability to regulate and control the flow of information within its borders. Historically, China has maintained strict control over online content, employing firewalls and censorship to prevent citizens from accessing foreign platforms that contradict state narratives. The risks of allowing a foreign-controlled digital network over Chinese territory became evident in 2020 when rumors spread about a potential US ban on TikTok. The American government raised concerns about how the Chinese-owned platform collected and handled user data, fearing that the Chinese Communist Party could access private information. The situation underscored China's own obsession with information control, as its government enforces strict regulations on all data entering and leaving the country. Starlink versus China's digital control. Starlink presents an even bigger challenge than social media platforms like TikTok. Unlike apps, which can be restricted or banned, Starlink satellites physically orbit over nations, making them much harder to control. Elon Musk's promise to provide global, uncensored internet access directly contradicts China's strict internet regulations. The idea that citizens could bypass state censorship and access unrestricted information alarms Chinese authorities. With a growing number of Chinese citizens expressing interest in Starlink, the government sees each technological advancement as a direct threat to its information monopoly. China has yet to officially announce a competing satellite network to challenge Starlink, but analysts believe it is only a matter of time. Given the country's track record of replicating and improving upon Western technologies, many expect China to launch its own extensive satellite system in the near future. However, Starlink's expansion raises another critical issue: space congestion. With thousands of satellites already in orbit and many more planned, the increasing number of spacecraft crowding Earth's lower orbit creates new geopolitical and technological tensions. The growing threat of space congestion. China isn't the only country worried about Starlink's expansion. With SpaceX launching thousands of satellites at an unprecedented pace, concerns over space congestion are growing worldwide. These small satellites fill up orbital slots that other nations or companies might need, creating a potential traffic jam in low Earth orbit. A crowded orbital environment increases the risk of satellite collisions, which could trigger a disastrous chain reaction known as the Kessler syndrome. This scenario, first theorized by NASA scientist Donald J. Kessler, suggests that if too many objects collide in orbit, the resulting debris could cause further collisions, eventually making certain regions of space unusable for decades. Given the growing reliance on satellite-based technology, such a disaster would cripple communication networks, GPS systems, and global internet access. China, aware of this looming issue, sees Starlink as both a geopolitical challenge and an environmental hazard. If SpaceX continues its aggressive expansion, it could dominate the available orbital space, leaving little room for Chinese satellites to maneuver freely. This scenario would not only limit China's ability to develop its own satellite networks, but also force it into a position of technological dependence on the US, something the Chinese government has actively sought to avoid. The future of the space race. The battle over space isn't just about exploration anymore. It's about control, cybersecurity, and political influence. While SpaceX presents Starlink as a tool for global connectivity, China views it as a potential Trojan horse that could compromise its digital sovereignty. The conflict between Starlink and Chinese authorities highlights the broader struggle for dominance in the final frontier. As China continues to develop its own space technologies and satellite networks, future clashes between Musk's expanding Starlink empire and Chinese space ambitions seem inevitable. Whether through cyber warfare, regulatory crackdowns, or direct competition in orbit, the race for digital supremacy in space is only beginning. The growing concerns of Starlink's role in military operations. Today, over 11,300 satellites orbit the Earth, and nearly 6,000 of them belong to Starlink. This rapid expansion has sparked serious concerns, not only about space congestion, but also about the implications of a single US company controlling such a significant portion of global satellite communications. With Starlink satellites occupying vast regions of low Earth orbit, the likelihood of collisions with future Chinese military or commercial satellites increases. Such an incident could lead to international disputes, especially if a Chinese military satellite were to crash into a Starlink satellite or vice versa. How would both nations interpret such an event? Would it be dismissed as an accident, or could it be perceived as an act of hostility? Currently, the US Navy's growing reliance on Starlink raises additional concerns, blurring the lines between private enterprise and military operations. While Starlink was initially designed as a civilian technology to provide global internet access, its integration into military strategies has given it an entirely new dimension. The military's increasing dependence on Elon Musk's satellite network has drawn scrutiny, raising questions about control, security, and the potential consequences of its monopolization. Starlink's growing role in military communications. Much like a knife that can be used for both preparing food and causing harm, Starlink's capabilities offer immense benefits, but also raise serious risks. The US military quickly recognized the value of the network in securing communication channels for troops operating in remote areas with no cell towers or infrastructure. In 2023, the US Navy began testing Starlink on its ships, hoping to provide sailors with more reliable internet access while at sea. The results were overwhelmingly positive. Not only did Starlink improve communication between ships and command centers, but it also gave soldiers the ability to stay connected with their families while deployed. The psychological impact of this was significant. Many soldiers reported a boost in morale, with the ability to communicate with loved ones giving them a greater sense of purpose and resilience. Aircraft Commander Dwight Eisenhower shared his experience, describing how Starlink played a vital role in his 9-month deployment in the Middle East. He and his fellow soldiers found solace in knowing they could reconnect with their families after each mission. Beyond the emotional benefits, Starlink also streamlined administrative operations. Military officials noted a drastic improvement in response times, data sharing, and overall efficiency. With the military already stretched thin across various global conflicts, returning to older communication methods would not only be inefficient, but also dangerous. The Pentagon's investigation into Elon Musk's role. Despite Starlink's obvious advantages, concerns about Elon Musk's influence over US military operations have grown. Since Starlink remains a private enterprise, questions about its neutrality, data security, and potential conflicts of interest remain largely unanswered. Many worry that Musk, as a businessman, might prioritize profit over national security, potentially making deals with foreign governments, including adversaries like Russia or China. These concerns prompted US Senators Jack Reed and Jeanne Shaheen, members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, to push for a formal investigation. Their primary worry was that Musk might be negotiating exclusive contracts with foreign entities, potentially jeopardizing US military operations. They also urged the Department of Defense to impose strict limitations to ensure Musk's control over Starlink could not be exploited for unauthorized purposes. The Pentagon responded by launching an investigation led by US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. As of December last year, the legal review into Musk's involvement in defense operations remains ongoing. Officials are assessing whether Starlink's role in military communications should be further regulated and whether alternative satellite networks should be developed to reduce reliance on a private entity. The future of Starlink in military operations. The question now is whether the US government should develop its own independent satellite communication system instead of depending on a private company. While Starlink has provided an unparalleled communication advantage, Its increasing influence in military operations raises concerns about accountability and long-term sustainability. For China, this issue goes beyond satellite collisions and orbital congestion. The real concern lies in how Starlink has become a tool for the US military, with capabilities that could be weaponized against foreign nations. The ability to provide secure, high-speed communication in conflict zones makes Starlink a formidable asset, giving the US a technological edge in modern warfare. The conflict over satellite dominance is no longer just about internet access. It has become a matter of national security, control over space, and geopolitical strategy. Whether the US military will continue to depend on Starlink or seek alternatives remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: the power struggle over space technology is only just beginning. China's attack on Starlink. On January 15, 2025, the South China Morning Post published a report that sent shockwaves across the East. Wu Yunhua, one of China's leading astronautics experts, had successfully simulated an operation using fewer than 100 Chinese satellites to disable almost 2,000 Starlink satellites for over 12 hours. The operation was so strategically brilliant that it was featured in a Chinese academic journal, showcasing China's advancements in space warfare capabilities. This development caught the attention of Elon Musk, who quickly spoke out about the potential dangers of this new technology. He claimed that while the technology appeared to be sophisticated, it was actually a veiled weapon. According to Musk, these satellites utilized lasers and microwaves to disable Starlink satellites, and what worried him most was the artificial intelligence controlling the operation. Wu Yunhua and his team had based their attack algorithm on the hunting strategies of whales, trapping their targets in small, confined spaces before striking with precision. Wu Yunhua's simulation demonstrated that China could execute this strategy in under 2 minutes, using just 99 satellites to disable 1,500 Starlink units. At this rate, Musk's entire 6,000 satellite network could be neutralized within a day, using just 4 consecutive attacks. Realizing the severity of the situation, Musk publicly voiced his concerns, reiterating that he never wanted trouble with China. But with China aggressively testing new space warfare capabilities, a confrontation seemed inevitable. Why China sees Starlink as a threat? China's hostility towards Starlink goes beyond technological competition. From a military perspective, Chinese officials see Starlink as a direct security threat. With over 6,000 satellites in orbit, Starlink could easily be used by the US military for intelligence gathering, secure communications, and strategic advantages in global conflicts. The turning point for China's concerns came in early 2022, when Starlink played a crucial role in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. On February 24, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and to prevent outside interference, Russian forces destroyed Ukraine's communication infrastructure. Ukrainian officials reached out to SpaceX, requesting access to Starlink. Within a week, thousands of Starlink units were delivered, restoring internet access and providing Ukrainian soldiers with an advantage. With secure and uninterrupted communications, the Ukrainian forces managed to resist Russian advances far longer than expected. However, Starlink's service was initially restricted to certain regions. 6 months later, Ukrainian officials requested that Starlink expand its coverage to Crimea, an area critical to launching counteroffensives. Musk declined, stating that he did not want to escalate the war. His decision angered Ukrainian officials, who saw it as a betrayal, but it also caught the attention of Chinese authorities. China viewed Musk's involvement in Ukraine as proof that Starlink could be weaponized against them in future conflicts. While Musk insisted that Starlink was a civilian service, China interpreted it as an extension of US military capabilities. This realization led to increased cyberattacks on Starlink, as China sought to undermine the network before it could pose a direct threat to their military operations. China's cyberattacks on Starlink. Starting in mid-2024, Starlink engineers noticed unusual malfunctions in both older and newer satellites. Initially, they assumed these were hardware failures, but as the disruptions became more frequent, it became clear that they were under attack. Unlike Russia's previous cyber attacks on Starlink, which involved brute force hacking attempts, China's approach was far more sophisticated. According to reports from the Royal United Services Institute, Chinese cyber warfare units had found a way to temporarily disable Starlink satellites without completely destroying them. These intermittent disruptions suggested China was testing their capabilities, seeing how much damage they could inflict without triggering a full-scale response. At the same time, China announced the Guang project, an ambitious initiative to launch a massive fleet of Chinese satellites to provide global internet services. Unlike Starlink, which was privately owned, Guang was a state-controlled network, directly managed by the China Satellite Network Group. This meant that China's satellite communications network would be fully integrated with government operations, including military and intelligence applications. While Guang's official goal was to provide better internet services for Chinese citizens and reduce reliance on foreign technology, it also had significant strategic implications. With China aiming to launch 13,000 satellites under the Guang initiative, 500 of which were scheduled to be in orbit by December 2024, the stage was set for an unprecedented space race between Starlink and China's government-backed satellite network. One of the most immediate concerns with both Starlink and Guang expanding their satellite networks is space congestion. As of today, there are over 11,300 satellites orbiting Earth, nearly 6,000 of which belong to Starlink. If China follows through with its plan to launch 13,000 satellites, the number of active satellites in orbit will more than double. The bigger problem, however, is the risk of military escalation. If one of China's military satellites collides with a Starlink satellite, how would both sides respond? Would it be considered an act of aggression? Could it lead to retaliatory actions? These unanswered questions add another layer of uncertainty to an already tense geopolitical situation, and we have no option but to wait for answers. Alright, so that's it for this video, and if you want to watch more amazing content like this, check out some of our other videos. Bye.